South Africa's government, and why this so-called surprise plane of Gazans was never really a surprise at all. The South African government claimed they had no idea that this flight was coming. They said Israel was ethnically cleansing Gazans. They even claimed the passengers didn't have proper passport stamps. None of that is even remotely true. And honestly, they know it. First of all, Palestinians don't need a visa to enter South Africa. Second, you can't charter a plane to a major international airport without the government approving it. There are flight plans, security clearances, diplomatic notifications. This is basic. It's physically impossible for any government to be unaware of a chartered international arrival on its own soil. So why the acting? Why the fake outrage? Because this time, Israel was the one facilitating the transfer of Gazans. That's it. The entire meltdown was political theater. When South Africa brings Gazans into the country, it's humanitarian. And when Israel helps Gazans exit a war zone, suddenly it's ethnic cleansing, even though it's only 150 of them. What an absolute joke. And just to expose this hypocrisy even more, last year, Imtiaz Sooliman, a Muslim Brotherhood activist who has fundraised for Hamas, flew a plane of 59 Gazan doctors and medical students into South Africa. This was celebrated in South Africa as a great humanitarian effort. But when Israel does the exact same thing, unacceptable, criminal, genocide, propaganda in its purest form. And here's the part that they really hope that you never figure out. With the Rafah crossing closed and the Egyptian agency Hala shut down, the Palestinian Authority is no longer getting its cut, its kickbacks, from Gazans exiting the Strip. And that is the real reason that we saw the Palestinian Authority demanding that South Africa not admit these Gazans into their country. It's not security or procedure, just money. Now let's talk about Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool, the man I just debated on Piers Morgan this week. And let me tell you, it didn't go well for him in this debate. Rasool has spent decades building relationships with Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood figures, meeting them regularly. He's praised Yusuf al-Qaradawi, the godfather of the Muslim Brotherhood, calling him his spiritual guide and saying that his days with him were some of the most memorable in his life. In fact, Rasool's own charity even co-hosted events with Qaradawi's organization. And just a few months before he was appointed to ambassador to the United States, he proudly hosted a delegation of the Muslim Brotherhood focused on advancing the Palestinian cause. But Rasool also is a Hamas fanboy. He boasted on social media about having a keffiyeh signed by Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh just weeks before October 7th. And it gets worse. In March 2019, Rasool participated in a fundraising gala organized by his close friend, Imtiaz Sooliman, yet the same one who brought that plane of Gazans last year. And this event was attended by Hamas officials. Sooliman is also a friend of Bassem Naim, the Hamas Minister of Health, former Hamas Minister of Health, responsible for helping to build the hospital tunnel system that was used to traffic hostages on and after October 7th. Now, at that same event was Sheikh Ibrahim Gabriels of the Al-Quds Foundation, an organization that is directly linked to Hamas and handed over to him by Sooliman years earlier. And what did Ibrahim Rasool say at that gala? He said, and I quote, "Let us help equip our brothers and sisters for a war that is surely coming." And indeed, the money raised that night went straight into the Hamas-controlled Gaza Ministry of Health during a Hamas terror campaign at the Gaza border in 2019. Now, Rasool has a long track record of meeting Hamas Politburo members, including Mohammed Nazal, a man responsible for moving money and equipment into Gaza. He's also praised Hamas founder Ahmed Yassin as one of his greatest inspirations and even quoted Yassin's call to fight under a flag of Islam. And yes, this is the same Ibrahim Rasool who was expelled recently from the United States for calling Trump a white supremacist while serving as a diplomat, and whose prior stint as an ambassador ended after he was caught bribing journalists with public money to write positive stories about him. And then there's Naledi Pandor, the former head of South Africa's foreign ministry, Durko, who was just kicked out of the United States this week. This is the same person who flew to Iran weeks after October 7th to meet with the regime that arms Hamas. She spent years aligning South Africa with the most extreme anti-Israel and anti-Western actors in the world. She even publicly endorsed armed resistance, aka terrorism. Take a look.
Armed struggle may become a necessity. I said recently in America that we as Muslims, we are a peace-loving people, but we are permitted to engage in jihad when necessary. And we must remember this.
Warning, if you're paying $1,000 plus for aircon installation,
The officials isn't unusual, and it's what got South Africa grey-listed for terror financing too. They are deeply entangled with Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood and willing to be the African base for the Islamic Republic of Iran as well. South Africa isn't a neutral actor. It's compromised, and it's time that the world sees it and the ANC for exactly what they are. Sadly, this whole Islamist problem isn't limited to South Africa. Around the world, Islamist networks are expanding from Africa to America. So let's look at what else happened this week. First off, the latest development in the relentless and escalating violence against Christians in Nigeria. On Friday, more than 300 children were kidnapped from a Christian Association of Nigeria-affiliated boarding school in Papiri in Niger State. Now, the victims were both boys and girls, some as young as 10, and along with them, 12 teachers were also kidnapped. Armed men stormed the campus before dawn and forced hundreds of terrified children and their teachers into the forest. Now, all of this is part of a systemic campaign of violence against Christian communities driven by Fulani Islamist jihadists and other terror groups who continue to operate with near total impunity. And the numbers reveal the true scale of this crisis. More than 7,000 Christians have been killed in Nigeria just in the first 7 months of this year alone. And since 2009, at least 52,000 Christians have been murdered in targeted attacks on churches, schools, and rural communities. Entire villages have been razed. Clergy have been executed. Children have been taken from their families and never seen again. And yet, despite the magnitude of this horror, the international media and most of the international community continues to ignore it. This attack is only the latest chapter in a long and bloody campaign that the world refuses to acknowledge, and the response is little more than a whisper. Fulani Islamist jihadists and other militants continue to strike at night in brutal attacks like we saw last week, raiding Christian villages with automatic weapons, torching homes, and the world has signaled through silence that Christian lives in Nigeria don't command the same attention or protection as others. The international community must acknowledge that a systematic campaign of jihadist violence against Christians is happening in real time and take action. Now, this next story is absolutely wild and should outrage every single taxpayer in America, because what we're looking at is not just welfare fraud. This is an international jihad financing operation run out of Minnesota using taxpayer money. According to City Journal investigators, it was revealed this week that Somalian Islamists inside the Twin Cities exploited Minnesota's Housing Stabilization Services Program and other social programs with near zero oversight. Now, this program was supposed to cost just over $2 million a year. Instead, it exploded to $21 million, then $42 million, then $74 million, and by 2025, it hit $104 million in payouts. The money was flowing faster than the state could even track it. But here is the most shocking part. Law enforcement sources found that tens of millions of dollars were moved through informal Hawala transfer networks straight to Somalia, where Al-Shabaab takes a cut from every transfer. That's an Al-Qaeda affiliate. So Minnesota taxpayers were unwillingly funding jihad terror overseas, while these fraudsters pretended to provide social services. Now, some of these same networks were also involved in the Feeding Our Future scandal, where nearly 200 million federal child nutrition dollars were stolen through fake meal counts and fabricated attendance. Now, a retired federal task force detective said that he found Somalis sending out money while actively receiving public assistance, and that this is a welfare fraud on a massive scale. Another Minnesota official said that al-Shabaab takes a cut of every single dollar sent from the Twin Cities. And the scale of this operation is truly staggering, especially given that it's been ignored for years by politicians terrified of being called racist. Minnesota is now seeing the consequences from massive fraud to violent Somali criminal gangs operating in broad daylight to entire networks laundering money abroad. This is what happens when a state refuses to enforce its own laws. The United States can't allow its welfare system to become a bank account for foreign terror organizations. Any non-citizens who is involved with this scheme must be deported immediately. Minnesota has to shut down these criminal gangs and jihad financing networks that are operating right in the heart of the Midwest. And finally, the latest development in the shameful incident that took place in Birmingham, UK, when West Midlands police banned Maccabi Tel Aviv fans from attending their match against Aston Villa, while hundreds of anti-Israel protesters were allowed to gather outside the stadium. A new report from The Times revealed that the justification for the ban was built on claims that were simply not true. West Midlands police told officials that Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters had engaged in extreme violence during their prior match in Amsterdam, including throwing people into a canal and sparking such havoc that 5,000 Dutch police officers were deployed. But the Dutch authorities say that none of that ever happened. There were no civilians thrown into water, there was no large-scale violence, and the number of officers on duty was about 1,200, not 5,000. Now, despite this, the police in Birmingham used these false claims to ban Israeli fans completely from the game. Yet at the same time, they permitted these hundreds of anti-Israel activists to protest directly outside the stadium, chanting for intifada and all kinds of other things without similar restrictions. That double standard is now justifiably under intense scrutiny. The UK Prime Minister has said the decision was wrong and that the role of the police is to ensure that all fans can enjoy football safely, not to create discriminatory barriers based on fake intelligence. This latest revelation only deepens the questions about why Jewish fans were targeted and who authorized the use of false information in the first place. This story is obviously far from over, and pressure is mounting for a full investigation into how this decision was made and why misinformation was allowed to dictate the policing policy in the United Kingdom. Gears a little bit and take a quick look at the good, the bad, and the ugly stories of this week. Our good story of the week, the unhinged Jew hater Marjorie Taylor Greene has finally resigned from United States Congress, and not a moment too soon. Greene announced she will step down in January after a complete political meltdown, including a public break with Donald Trump and a string of humiliating failures that left her isolated even within her own party. According to reports, she told allies she refused to be what she called a battered wife to Trump after he repeatedly ignored her and sidelined her from policy discussions. Now, this is the same woman who spent years spreading anti-Semitic conspiracies and attacking Jewish communities and normalizing extremism in American politics. Her exit is a win for decency, and she won't be missed. And our bad story of the week, the wildfires are raging through Iran's ancient Hyrcanian forests, a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the oldest ecological treasures on Earth. Now, these fires are not just a natural disaster. They're actually a direct consequence of the Islamic Republic of Iran's collapsing infrastructure and a severe nationwide water crisis. Reservoirs are empty, rainfall is at historic lows, and the regime has no functional plan to protect its environment or its people or its future. And now even the natural beauty and irreplaceable heritage of the land of Iran is being destroyed by the regime's sheer incompetence and neglect. And finally, for our ugly story of the week, how could it be anything other than Mayor-elect Mamdani, who has once again shown his true colors when a mob of Jew haters surrounded a New York City synagogue, chanting for intifada and calling for the death of IDF soldiers. Now, he could have done the obvious. He could have offered a clear moral condemnation, but instead he chose to qualify it by turning his criticism towards Nefesh B'Nefesh, the organization inside holding an event to help North Americans with the logistical process of moving to Israel. Mamdani actually suggested that this nonprofit was violating international law, as if the mayor of New York City has any authority over where Jews can and cannot live, or any role in interpreting international legal standards. It's an outrageous overreach and a distraction from the real issue, which is a mob intimidating Jews at a house of worship. This has to stop. New York should not tolerate leaders who excuse Jew hatred while lecturing Jews on their rights and their homeland.